Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be discussing 5 different Seth Jones trades that can actually happen. Now, if you don't know, this past week, Seth Jones was recently reported to basically want out of the Columbus Blue Jackets, and if they didn't end up trading him, he would eventually leave onto free agency after next season. And this has prompted a ton of trade ideas, a ton of trade rumors, and we pretty much know this offseason as well, even before the draft, that a Seth Jones trade is very likely. But what are the most likely interested candidates for Seth Jones? What are the teams that will most likely trade for him, and what would the trade packages and actual trade themselves end up looking like? Watch till the end for all of the trade proposals, all of the trade rumors, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're new. 60% of the people watching the videos are not subscribed, so we'd love to have the Grav gang for more almost daily hockey and trade content just like this. And of course, in today's video, we're going to be going through 5 different mock trades from 5 different teams to see what a Seth Jones trade could actually look like. Now, Seth Jones is one of the most interesting and fascinating players out there in the NHL. There's really 2 sides to the debate of Seth Jones, it seems like. One side will tell you he's the best thing since sliced bread. The other side will tell you he's the worst thing since sliced bread. And it's hard to really get a gauge on what the actual value of him is. I think the value right now with Seth Jones leans towards the latter of just teams thinking he can be a top 10 defenseman if he's molded right. But I think everybody can kind of agree Seth Jones has not been the greatest these past couple of years, especially this past year where he was kind of just at an average level at best. For 56 games, his points weren't that bad. 5 goals, 23 assists, and 28 points on the year. Not too bad in terms of the points, but the overall play, I thought, the eye test as well, kind of showed that his game was kind of declining quite a bit and had one of the worst years of his career, I thought, too. It just wasn't really too pretty, especially compared to Zach Werenski, who, when he did play, when he was healthy, had a pretty solid year for himself, while Seth Jones had the exact opposite. Now, I personally think Seth Jones can still be a top 20 defenseman. I think the skill and the talent is still there, but I think it definitely depends what team he's on and the situation he's in if he'll actually get up to that point. It's obvious that he's kind of checked out from the Columbus Blue Jackets and he wants somewhere where he can win, be in a good position, but won't be the main number 1 guy playing 40,000 minutes a night. I think Seth Jones, in a good middle pair role to start out on a new team, could actually do pretty well for himself. He has the talent to be a quality defenseman, and obviously has the size and the tools to be worth a trade. Now, I have 5 trades lined up today, some you might agree with, some you might disagree with, that I think could make sense for Seth Jones and could be very likely destinations for him. And we also saw reports of a trade possibly happening before the draft, so a trade could be happening very soon as well. But I want to start out today with the first mock trade involving the Chicago Blackhawks and the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think the Blackhawks are a very likely option to not just go after Seth Jones, but eventually make a trade happen. Now, when it comes to the actual mock trade itself, starting out with the Chicago Blackhawks side of things, they will end up trading for Seth Jones. But on the other side, to Columbus, they will end up receiving an 11th overall pick from Chicago, Alec Regula, defensive prospect, Brett Connolly, and a 2022 4th round pick. Now, this has a lot of different layers to it. First things first, for Columbus, you get a great overall 1st round pick. You got Alec Regula, who I think could be an NHL defenseman, but still very raw and was kind of just average in the AHL this year for Chicago's system. But you get Brett Connolly, who can also be an NHL contributor, and a 4th round pick. But that 11th overall pick is really the main thing there. I think that'll pretty much be as much as a team will give up, at least. Now, we'll see later on in the video over the other mock trades. But I think the 11th overall pick is about as good as Columbus will get. And you get a decent defensive prospect as well on top of that. I don't think that's a crazy amount for Seth Jones, especially if he turns into that top 2 defenseman that I think he has potential to be. It would look a little bit rough to start out, but Columbus on top of that, now if that trade would have 4 first-round picks, an absolute surplus. And I think, again, those first-round picks, at least one of them, will be what especially Columbus is looking for in a Seth Jones trade. And even though if I was Chicago, it might be a little bit much on paper to give up, if Seth Jones becomes that top pairing D-man on Chicago, I don't exactly see them complaining too much. And also, you do get rid of the Brett Connolly contract, which in signing Seth Jones will definitely be useful. But now going on to the second Seth Jones trade that can actually actually happen this offseason. We're now going to move on to a team that might not be the main contender for Seth Jones, but I think will definitely be around conversations, a good swoop in, and be the team that gets it done. We're now going to move on to the Montreal Canadiens and the Mont trade for Seth Jones. Now, of course, starting out, Seth Jones goes to the Montreal Canadiens, but in exchange for the Columbus Blue Jackets, they will get Montreal's first-round pick, a 2021 third-round pick, which will also be Montreal's, or actually will be Chicago's, and will be also Josh Brook, defensive prospect, on top of that. I think this is still a little bit too much and might be a little bit too much for me to give. I was the Montreal Canadiens, but again, looking at what they would need, especially with guys like Shea Weber, maybe declining after this year after a strong playoffs, they could use that potential number one for the future. I don't know if Alexander Romanov will be that, but Seth Jones has potential of being that. And again, even if it is 17th overall, which we'll see if that actually is the case, and even though it might be a little bit too much for me to give, if it does work out just like the Chicago trade, Montreal will be absolutely happy with it. And I do think Seth Jones has potential to be really, really solid in Montreal if they don't treat him as the savior to start out, which will be hard for Montreal media for sure if this trade actually ends up happening. But they have the assets for it. They can honestly skip out on a first-round selection. They have a great prospect pool still, and I think Montreal's in a position to get a Seth Jones and still be pretty happy about it, even if they overpay. Now, the only real problem I see with Seth Jones going to Montreal is just the positional fit. He is a right defenseman, and both Shea Weber and Petrie as well are right D-men, so that would create a little bit of a weird situation there where maybe you put Seth Jones on the left and see what happens, but I think still in terms of the actual play of the Montreal Canadiens, Seth Jones could fit in pretty well there and hopefully will be rejuvenated in a whole different market and a completely different one from the Columbus Blue Jackets, but I still think for Montreal, even though it isn't the perfect fit, I think they'll still be in the race and could be one of the main teams going right to the very end to get Seth Jones in their franchise. But now moving on to the third potential mock trade for Seth Jones and the third trade that can actually happen for Seth. We're now going to move on to a team that is probably, and according to some people as well, the main contender for Seth Jones in the race. And we're now going to move on to a mock trade involving the Los Angeles Kings. This one is also a super fascinating one. Does not involve a first-round pick, but I don't think that's too much of a problem for the LA Kings or the Columbus Blue Jackets. With this trade, Seth Jones will go to the LA Kings in exchange for Gabriel Vilardi, Brock Faber, a 2021 second-round pick, and a 2021 third-round pick. This is a fascinating one because, again, no first-round pick is involved, but you technically have Gabriel Vilardi, who was a first-round pick and still has talent to be a top-6 player. You got Brock Faber, who was a second-round pick last year and could be a top 4 defenseman in the future. You got a second-round pick this year and a 2023 or a 2021 third-rounder as well. So you still got quite a bit of assets. No first-round pick, but still some guys you would love to add to your team. A guy that Columbus could have on their future in the defense. A guy that could have on the forward group a lot with Gabriel Vilardi, who fits their game, I think, pretty well. And I think it pretty much checks all the boxes. This one might be the lowest value out of the ones I mentioned so far, but still, some great prospects and some great picks. I think that could definitely get done. Maybe they upgrade that 2021 third rounder into maybe like a 2022 second rounder perhaps, but I think that would be pretty much it, and I think this deal could end up getting done. Now, I think the LA Kings fit is very, very interesting, not just because they have the prospects and the picks to totally get a deal done if they wanted to, but also in terms of the fit, because Seth Jones would not be the number one right D there. He would be behind Drew Doughty and would likely be behind him as well in the power play and the penalty kill, and would not be as thrust into the fire as he has been with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I think that is absolutely huge, at least to start out. He'll probably be the successor, of course, to Drew Doughty in that way, but he won't have to be the savior of the franchise like if he went to Montreal perhaps, and I think that is absolutely key. He will be behind Drew Doughty, will play a lot less minutes, get his game refocused, and a team like LA who has some fantastic coaches over there, some great development coaches over there, I think could definitely hone Seth Jones' skills right into place. I think if they have to make a deal happen, I think it definitely can. LA has the cap space, they have the prospects, they have the situation that is perfect for Seth Jones, and I think this is probably one of the most likely, if not the most likely destination for Jones to end up on. But now we're going to move on to the fourth trade for Seth Jones that can actually happen. Now, this one is a little bit nutty, but hear me out for a second. We're now going to go to the fourth trade that can actually happen, this time involving the Vancouver Canucks. Now, I think Jim Benning will get a little bit creative here. I mean, he has still been extended, and he will still stay as the Canucks GM, but I don't know how long that leash will be, especially if this next season is once again a failure. And I think he'll want to go for some big pieces. Seth Jones is definitely that. Going to the Vancouver Canucks for the mock trade, Seth Jones will go to Vancouver. In exchange, though, the Columbus Columbus Blue Jackets will get the 9th overall pick from the Canucks, the contracts of Louis Eriksson, Anton Roussel, and Braden Holtby. This puts $11 million out of the Vancouver Canucks hands and into the Columbus Blue Jackets, quite a bit more than what they would have had normally, and that definitely puts them in a better position to sign guys like Elias Pettersson, sign guys like Quinn Hughes, and get a guy like Seth Jones. Now again, the big price is that 9th overall pick, but Vancouver still has a decent prospect pool, and they got guys like Podkolzin coming up as well that will be contributing factors from their first round pick in 2019, and I don't know if they need this 9th overall pick. Sure, getting a guy like a Ken Johnson or a Dylan Guenther will be really, really good for them, but I feel like especially around that spot is where it kind of starts to drop off a little bit in the draft, and for Vancouver, they're able to get a guy like a Seth Jones, and he's able to become that top pairing demon that they badly need right now. That would be absolutely worth it, and again, in the process, they do give them the 9th overall pick, but again, they pretty much have to give that up, especially to get rid of the Eriksson, the Anton Roussel contracts, and Columbus has more than enough cap space to actually make that deal happen, and I think especially with their trending into this rebuild phase, this rebuild mode, they would be still pretty glad to take on those contracts for a 9th overall pick. That would mean they have 4 first-round picks, but 2 inside the top 10, and that's not too bad for the start of at least a retool for Columbus. I think this works out great for both sides involved. Vancouver gets their big guy, they get rid of contracts, and Columbus gets the 9th overall pick, which will set them up very nicely for the future. And another thing I forgot to mention was that Braden Holtby coming to the Columbus Blue Jackets. I think another big part of the Columbus Blue Jackets offseason will be trading one of their starting goaltenders. I think Braden Holtby will be the backup to whoever they end up keeping. So they kind of make it fit even in a strange little way where they get Holtby and still bring on that contract, but still have a guy that will be serviceable at the NHL level. But now we're going to move on to the 5th mock trade and the 5th trade for Seth Jones that can actually happen. This is probably the most galaxy brain one I have today, but this one, when I was thinking about it, trying to make something crazy work, I think it actually might be crazy enough to actually happen at this year's NHL draft. And we've talked about first round picks being involved before, great prospects being involved before, but what about 2 first round picks and 2 prospects as well? We're now going to move on to the 5th mock trade, this time involving the Anaheim Ducks. And I think you might know what I'm alluding to here. For the actual mock trade itself, let's start with the Anaheim Ducks side. They will get Seth Jones and the 5th overall pick from the Columbus Blue Jackets. In exchange, Columbus gets the 3rd overall pick from Anaheim, Josh Mahora, defensive prospect, first rounder Braden Tracy from a couple years back, and a 2021 4th round pick. So they exchange first rounders, they exchange top 5 picks, but Anaheim gets Seth Jones, but Columbus moves up a couple of picks. They get a decent defensive prospect in Josh Mahora, who will likely be a bottom pairing guy for the future, but still a good body, and Braden Tracy, who could develop into a middle 6 player on top of that 4th round pick and on top of getting that 3rd overall pick. Especially for a team like Anaheim, they don't really need that 3rd overall pick, especially if it's Beniers at number 2, Owen Power at number 1. They could still get probably a guy they want at that 5th overall pick, especially they would have at least an ability to get a guy like a Hughes, a guy like an Eklund, a guy like a Clark, maybe even Edmondson if they want, and still drop back in the draft. So honestly, I think it's a win-win for both teams, and Columbus, especially if they want to lock in their place to get a guy like a William Eklund perhaps, going to number 3 would pretty much do that, I think, for them, and could be worth it in the process. Again, they get some great prospects back as well and move up in the draft. Now, you might add maybe a little bit on Columbus's side here, I guess, but I think it would be pretty worth it for both teams and would fix a lot of the problems for both teams as well. Anaheim, maybe a little bit fast in the rebuild, but Seth Jones would be a huge part of that defense and would still be in his prime by the time the Anaheim Ducks actually get to the other side and are actually starting to win games. I think it will be great for both teams, and again, especially for Columbus, they can move up to the 3rd overall pick, and that wouldn't be too bad. They were trying to get the 3rd overall pick, obviously, or be in the top 3 of the lottery, but this is not a bad consolation prize. And again, they get prospects on top of that. They get that 3rd overall pick, which I think is definitely going to be useful for them. And I think both teams in this case have a pretty good shot at winning the trade. But that is definitely my most creative one today. I doubt it's going to end up happening, but I could see it actually going down on draft day in a weird, wacky, alternate universe. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell. Make sure you comment down below, what do you agree and disagree with the mock trades, and what mock trade do you guys have for Seth Jones? Where do you see him going if he were to be traded? And of course, share this video with your friends. Get the mock trades out there and click on this card for all my hockey rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Thank you so much for watching. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.